Now, tonight we're looking at understanding God's providential working in our lives. And when we start thinking about some things, and people, you know, if you look up and you hear somebody, I often heard it that God's providence has been defined as God working indirectly in our lives. I don't like that. That's like God just accidentally did something. The truth is, if His providence is working in our lives, it's working directly. And that's why I put it. You know, it's directly and it's for our good and the good of His cause. That's even when something bad happens. You know, that sometimes we have that hard problem accepting that something bad may be working in our lives for our good, but we'll look a little more on that too. And we have the reminder, Romans 8, verse 28, that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. Now we're going to take a look at some scriptures that have to do with providence working, and mainly in this point of where it works in lives, in people's lives. We have one book, I think it's an interesting book, Esther. If you ever take time to really read the book of Esther, with each chapter, you can see providence going to work if you take time to see it. Now we've got on to Esther chapter 4, verse 13 through 14. This is where Esther has been told by Mordecai of Haman's plan to destroy the entire nation of the Jews. And notice that Mordecai told them to answer Esther, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" You know, when you open up the book of Esther, you find a point there where Ahasuerus, the king, has had a party after 7 days. This party, there's a lot of been drinking, a lot of consumption. And we don't know what he wanted to do with the Queen Bassi, or what he wanted to do, other than he wanted her to come and show her beauty. And she refused to come. And so they removed her as queen. Then they needed a queen. And this is what Mordecai is telling Esther. She is now the queen, and she has even said, "I can't go before the king except he call me. If I go before him and he doesn't extend his scepter to me, then I'll be put to death." And so Mordecai comes up to this answer. Mordecai is hoping to save the Jewish nation. So what we need to think about, and this is what we want to look at, what is God's providence? It's actually providing for future events. Somewhere in the future, it's providing for something then. So in that aspect, we don't always see it. Notice in chapter 2, verse 4 through 11, Esther, when they decided to replace the queen, then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. In Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. Now, interesting part about that, do you already see the providence possibly there? That it was in God's providence that Kish had been carried away by Nebuchadnezzar? No doubt. God knew there was going to be a time that someone would try to kill the Jews. And He's already providing for that day. And Mordecai brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan the citadel under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him. Pleased who? Oh, Haggai the custodian. And she obtained his favor, so he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. You can see God's hand in this. He's bringing her in. He's having her find favor in the eyes of the custodian, and he is actually giving her choice over. Guess who he already has decided should be queen? He's trying to help her find favor in the eyes of the king. Esther had not revealed her people or her family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Mordecai, right, he's worried about her. They've taken her. And at the same time, this man, he is, and here's another wise thing when we get into seeing it. It has been wise that she not tell she is a Jew. Why do you think that's wise?
They were in disfavor.
They were in disfavor. What happens if they become under further disfavor? And plus, when you think about, if you know the story, Haman, when he comes into his deal, if he knew Esther was a Jew, would he not behave differently? And still not accomplished his purpose. So what we need to understand is the indirect, or the direct working, but non-miraculous. Because what we read so far has been all just what most people would try to say circumstantial. Or coincidence. Chance. It just happened by chance. There's a favorite show of mine, they're always saying there's no such things as a chance or a circumstance. What was that other word I had? That just left my mind. Coincidence. No such thing as a coincidence. And sometimes we need to think about that. I want you to think about something in your life that you thought just happened that really didn't happen. Just happened. You know, here's the thing about providence. You can't see the future, but you can see the past. You can see where you made that left turn and when you were thinking about making right. You can see something where a thought came into your mind that's different. I am a great believer in providence because I've seen it in my life. A lot of it wasn't seeing it as it was happening, but even after the fact. I think I shared with Joey, when my stepfather died, the situation was he died on a day I was there and I was planning to leave the next morning. My mother was already where she was unable to get out of bed by herself. If I hadn't have been there, there would have been nobody able to get in to help her. See, I could go in greater detail, but I see that as God's providence that he died that day and not the next day. Because I was there. Someone was there. When we think about things of miraculous and non-miraculous in nature, now I've got this, that it has been both miraculous and non-miraculous. Why? Notice I put it past tense. Why? Because in the past, in the miraculous times, God did things miraculously. Today, he no longer does miraculous, so his providence is in a non-miraculous nature. But notice this point here in Genesis chapter 37. This chapter actually shows a good point of both miraculous and non-miraculous. Notice here in verse 3 to 8, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream. He told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaf stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brother said to him, Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words." Let's understand something, that God wanted Joseph in Egypt.
That was the plan.
That was the plan. How's he going to get him there?
He's going to use them brothers.
He's going to use them brothers. What they chose to do was evil, and we'll get to that a little bit. But here's reality. Joseph's dreams made them hate him more. Think about that. Without the dreams, they might have tolerated him a little more. See, that's the miraculous part. Jumping down to verse 25, after they had thrown Joseph in the pit, and they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked. There was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then many night traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Now here's the non-miraculous. They were there at the right place at the right time for Joseph's brothers to sell him.
His oldest brother, I think, was not there. He was away.
Reuben was the only one not there.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Joseph doesn't know Reuben's plan.
Yeah, he had a different plan.
Reuben had a different plan, and Joseph wouldn't know it for 19 years. If my math is right. Maybe a little more, actually a little more than that. 22 years. 22 years. Because we know Joseph is 30 when he appears before Pharaoh. When the brothers finally get there, the second time, he tells them we've had the 7 years of plenty, and there's 5 years left of the famine. So 7 and 2 is 9. So the time they came, he was 39 years old. So a year before is when he overheard Reuben telling them, "I told you not to harm the boy, not to do anything." And it's interesting.
Well, it's interesting in other ways too. I mean, they planned to kill him.
They planned to kill him.
And if it had not been for,
Reuben.
well, if it had not been for the
Traders.
Ishmaelite traders showing up at the
Yeah.
right time.
Reuben.
It kind of reminds you of Abraham when he raised a knife up and looked and there was a ram.
And there is miraculous. The miraculous part is God telling the angel telling him the whole, and the non-miraculous is the ram getting caught in the thicket. All at one time.
But this particular non-miraculous situation changed her mind.
Yeah, and that was the thing. Reuben had talked him into putting him in the pit instead of killing him. And his thought was, well, I'll sneak back later to get him out of the pit. And of course, when he got back, they had already sold him to the Ishmaelites. And again there, what if the Ishmaelites hadn't came along? What would they have done? They'd have killed him. So all these things work to this point. And you know, even while we're talking about this, what about the famine itself? What was part of God's plan to begin with?
To force them down there and come forward.
To get them down there Not just to save them from the famine as Joseph believed, but so he could deliver them from the bondage of Egypt, so they could understand the promised land and how much it should mean to them. There's a great example of the bondage of Egypt being the same as the bondage of sin. Our appreciation to God should be for His deliverance. Just as the Israelites should appreciate God delivering them from the bondage of Egypt and giving them a land that they had not earned. In fact, it wasn't even promised to them. It was promised to Abraham. And again, that's the point of providence. It's God's deliverance. Going back to Esther, there's an interesting thing that happens. In chapter 2, verse 21 through 23, and this is right after Esther's been made queen, it tells us, in those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther. And Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name, and when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on the gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Where's the providence that's happened here? Do you know where it is?
Favor to Esther.
Put his name before the king. What did you say,
I
George?
said favor to Esther.
Favor to Esther. Favor to Mordecai. There's a little thing there. That right there. That becomes very important. Written in the book of the Chronicles of the King. All these things are working to his favor, but when does it come about? Later on. When Naaman has gone to the point that he just totally hates Mordecai so bad, and he can't, no matter how much the king gives him or does for him, when he sees Mordecai will not pay homage to him, he wants to destroy him. Now notice, this is Haman's wife, Zeresh, and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it, then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. You know what banquet this is? This is the banquet where Esther has invited him a second time. They've already had one banquet, and that's what Haman came, and he was so happy about. He alone had been invited by the queen with the king. He felt like he was so important to the kingdom. But yet, when Mordecai didn't bow down to him or pay homage to him, and what is it to pay homage? Pay homage. Honor. Basically, it's pour down and kneel down and worship. That's why Mordecai wouldn't do it. And notice, this very night that he's having this gallows built, that night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, what honor or dignity had been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And the king's servants who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. Now do you see this way this is working? It wasn't by chance that the king was unable to sleep that night. It wasn't by chance that the book of Chronicles, which they read, was that particular area. That was God working. He was putting the king in remembrance of what Mordecai had done for him. And the fact that they had not done anything to honor Mordecai before that makes it even more pressing. And notice who's in the court. Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace and suggested that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. Isn't that interesting? How would you like to be the one to go tell the king you think somebody needs to be hung just as the king decided to honor them? And unfortunately for Mordecai, before he can say anything, or I guess fortunately for that moment, the king asked him what should be done. And so everything that Mordecai or Haman thought he was going to have done for himself ended up being done for Mordecai. Put him in one of the king's robes. Put him on the king's horse, which he has ridden himself. Parade him round and say, so should it be done for any man that the king honors. And Haman realized that night, his family did, that he wasn't going to succeed. And that's the thing about providence. When do we see it? After the fact. It can be, sometimes it may take us a while, we may have to look back years to see it. Sometimes we can look back and see it immediately as it happens. But it's always in hindsight. Going back to chapter 4, we started. Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do you not think your heart that you will escape the king's palace any more than all the other Jews? For if you remain completely silent this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house would perish. But who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are present in the Shushan, and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. Esther came to understand, if I had came into the kingdom for this day, then all will be well. If not, then I will perish. And if I perish now, I will perish now as in the future on that day that Mordecai had set up. That's kind of a thing that we ought to realize sometime about providence. What is providence trying to get us to do?
God's will.
God's will. To trust in God more. You know, the reality of it is, the more we can see where God is active in our lives, the more willing we ought to be willing to trust. How many times has He delivered us from one thing or another? Bunch. The song we sing, His grace reaches me. You see it in your lives? You know, I told Stephen this morning that the invitation song was a lesson in providence because it fits so well with my lesson. And he didn't know what my lesson was about. I didn't know what his invitation song was. So what else is it? God's providence. See? Sometimes I've often told people, I had people call me and say, well, I got somebody coming tomorrow. Can you do a lesson on this? Please don't do that. Because I told them, I said, you know, I've already got my lesson planned. Now, if they feel like I've been preaching to them and they come to me, oh, you knew I was coming, I have to say, yes, I do. And then it doesn't matter how much I try to convince them that I had that lesson already going, they're going to believe that I got that lesson together just for them. Wouldn't it be better, as I told them, to let God's providence have its work? And then I can honestly say, nope, didn't know anything about it. Maybe God brought you here for a reason today. This is the thing we should realize. Chapter 7 is after Esther tells the king the plan to annihilate her people, where she reveals herself to be a Jew. And the king is angry. She's revealed that Haman is the one. So it tells us, then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that the evil was determined against him by the king. There's some wisdom in knowing who you're attacking. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I am in the house? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. Also, everything that belonged to Haman was given to Mordecai and Esther. Think about that gallows, 50 cubits high, 90 feet roughly, or 75 feet. 75 feet.
That's high.
That's high. That was high enough for all those in the citadel to see Haman hung from what he had planned for Mordecai. In a lot of ways, Haman was digging his own grave. So the sin. But yet God's providence. Look what it did for Mordecai and his people. Look what it did for Mordecai and the Jews. And you know, there's something interesting in this. When Haman got the king to issue this decree that him and his compatriots written, once something bore the king's signet, it cannot be reversed. But King Ahasuerus wasn't stupid. When this came out, he gave Mordecai the signet ring which he originally had given to Haman, and told him and Esther to go and write every decree they saw fitting. And what they did was, before, where the Jewish nation could not resist their own destruction, it gave them the power to fight back. And it was sent to all the governors of all the provinces, and as the scriptures say, from India to Ethiopia, that they were to aid the Jews on that day. And they're fighting back. And they were able to destroy their enemies. Some 70,000 died that day across the Persian kingdom that the Jews destroyed. You know, I kind of thought about that today. if you read the decree that Mordecai gave, and you read the decree that Haman had gotten, you had been an enemy of the Jews, and you realize that, you know what? If you go up against the Jews, you're bringing on your own destruction. Why wouldn't you just stay home that day? Man, in good sense would have said, you know what? I lost this battle. But evidently 75,000 didn't have good sense. When you see the king's armies on their side. And there's an interesting thing. When the Jews killed their enemies, guess what they didn't do? Huh? They didn't mutilate them. But they also didn't take any of the plunder. They understood they weren't to get rich off of defending themselves. Again, I think that's God's providence lesson. When we go to Genesis chapter 50, here after Jacob has died, you know, Jacob lived 17 years with Joseph growing up, and then he lived another 17 years with Joseph in Egypt. I always thought that was interesting. He got just as much time after he found out that he was alive as he did beforehand. I think that's providential. But you know, his brothers understood Daddy's dead. Perhaps the only thing that was standing between us and death was Daddy. So they went to him. They actually sent a lie to him saying that Jacob had made some statements. But they did go to him and say, "Behold, we are your servants." Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore do not be afraid, I will provide for you and your little ones." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. I wonder if by this time Joseph had seen, I think he knew well how much God had helped him in his life. It wasn't by accident that he had been part of Potiphar's house.
What he said right here, God meant it for good.
God meant it for good, and it started back then and it kept going. Even the time that he was in prison, God used it for his good. Think about the point. He's there non-miraculously, but the butler and the baker had their dreams, which were miraculous. Why? Just so Joseph could tell them the meaning of them, so when the butler got back under Pharaoh and Pharaoh had his dreams, he would remember that Joseph could foretell dreams. And when he foretold Pharaoh's dreams and told him what God's intention was for him to appoint a wise man to be overseer of all those years of plenty and make preparation for those years of famine, Pharaoh's statement was, yeah, who else do we know that the Spirit of God is with? That was his exact words. Who else is it that the Spirit of God is with like Joseph? And made him second only to himself. A lot of things that we look for. In Galatians, Paul says that in the fullness of time, Jesus came forth to be born of a virgin. Miraculously, Jesus was born of a virgin. Non-miraculously, Mary was of the household of David, direct lineage of David, fulfilling God's prophecy. So many things. So many things we have where God works in our lives to bring about the good of his cause. Any questions, any comments?
It's interesting that many times people were not aware of the providence of God working on their lives until it came to pass. providence of God is such a, reaches so many people. It reaches to the birds and the animals. He provides for them. That's his providence. I suppose, does the word providence come from the root word provide? I'm assuming it does.
It does, it comes from the Greek word that
And,
what we use in Providential,
so
our Latin
all
word
of
provide.
his provisions for us, our daily bread is the providence in a sense. But I think that many times in a special way, he works in our lives, and sometimes we're aware of it, I think, and sometimes perhaps we're not. And all of a sudden we wake up later and say, you know, this must have been God working in my life. The Lord working out there.
Yeah. I mean, I think the more that we are aware that it is there, the more that we'll see it working. I listened to a young man about a year ago. I think he delivered the worst sermon on providence because he actually made a statement, I can't see it. He didn't talk about it. He didn't go to any of these scriptures we went to. And he said, my grandfather could see it, my uncle could see it, but I've just never seen it in my life. And I thought to myself, you're just not looking, dude.
And many times it's much later when we see, no,
Yeah.
when Joseph was in the pit, he wasn't seeing the.
He wasn't seeing the promise of God
at
yet.
that time.
And-
God was working with him in the pit.
Right. And I think he saw that God was with him all through that time, but he didn't see God's providence until that time when he saw his brothers
That's right.
there with him in Egypt. Yeah.
The grand,
But I don't think he saw it until they came down.
he didn't see the grand plan.
He didn't see the grand
He
plan
had saw brief excerpts there with some of the,
of God being with
in
him.
him, but the grand plan is what
Plan
he
where he was going to that day. And that's the thing that we need to take time to think about. You know, there's God's grand plan. But what's he doing today? Well, the little things I see him doing in my life are leading to the grand plan of our salvation.
I think it's also an element of our faith. Be able to see God work through the providence, even in history behind us or whatever. You know, as you mentioned, or as Ray mentioned, God's providence takes care of the world. It keeps everything going. He provides for this universe. He's holding it together on a grander scale. You know, if you go back to the Old Testament and look, God's chosen people went through some terrible times. They couldn't look, it would be hard for them to look back and say, well, this is, you know, we're happy to be here because it's God's providence. God was punishing them heavily for some of the things they were doing. Many of them died in the sword and died in terrible ways and things like that. They, you know, but in essence, the overall plan of God, He brought about His promise.
And there's a thing about providence. It only brings us to the point. It doesn't make us make the decision. Esther had her free will. She could have turned Mordecai down. But what did Mordecai say? If you don't step up, somebody else will. His belief was God was going to bring deliverance from somewhere. And that's something about providence too. It doesn't force us to do anything. It gives us opportunity. It helps us.
Those brothers were probably very glad that they weren't going to have the blood of their brother on their hands.
In the end, especially, I mean, if you ever take time to read about Judah, you know, Judah was the one that said, hey, let's sell it. But yet when they get down to Egypt the second time, and Joseph is going to take Benjamin as prisoner, what did Judah? No. Take me instead. Take me. I can't bear to go home and see my father go through what he went through 20 years ago with the death of his brother. I can't do it. Judah was a changed man. I I think seeing all the grief, you know, when you see Jacob standing before Pharaoh and Pharaoh asking Jacob how old he is, he said, the years of my misery have been 130 years.
Sad.
Sad. Jacob says, all my life has been misery. But yet when you read about him at the end of his life, he doesn't sound like a man that's miserable anymore. He's got his cherished son back. And I think Jacob even understood that it was for the good of the people.
You got his son back to power too.
Yeah, with power. So, you know, God's blessings again. Our trial of today may be leading to our blessings of tomorrow. That's what Providence should teach us. That no matter what we go through, God's going to be there with us. No matter what happens. Not much in this life happens by chance. But each gives us a chance of opportunity to get closer to God. Joseph, Esther, and Mordecai, they're good examples of those who used it to get closer to God. Some people we see, when their opportunities and providence came in, they just went further away from God. That's sad. That's sad. If there's not anyone who, or if there's anyone that's not a Christian tonight, you need to think about your walk with God. That perhaps the reason you're here this very night is because God wants you to understand how much He cares and how much He loves you and how much He wants you to be His faithful child. And if you are a Christian and there are things in your life that need to change, there's no doubt He wants you to realize your need to change and become more faithful. The question comes back to you, what will you do with it tonight? If you need to, we'd ask you to come when we stand and